House of the Dragon's biggest talking point thus far has been Rhaenyra and Daemon's life, even though dragons fly freely and prophecies determine the course of events. Today, we'll be talking about some of the latest developments in the series, the gross yet surprisingly beautiful scene, and how Viserys' secret just changed the entire course of the show. First off, there was some hesitation toward the couple. At the beginning of the series, viewers could tell that something was brewing between the uncle and niece duo. Hardened GOT fans were used to a little incest, but most viewers weren't completely on board with the idea. That changed when they got to see the amazing chemistry between the characters and the actors that portrayed them. Sparks flew between the two, and by the fourth episode, the entire audience was on board. With the release of episode 7, #Rhaenyra is now officially canon. Although the scene was hard to make out on screen due to the darkness in the episode, we are certain that the uncle and niece did the deed. If this is the case, we ask ourselves if we really needed yet another sexually explicit scenario. Yes, we need it because House of the Dragon delights in shocking its viewers with increasingly sexual content, and we can't seem to get enough of it. The scene in which they complete their icky connection is really quite moving in ways that advance the story while staying loyal to the books, much to the pleasure of #Rhaenyra fans everywhere. Now, for some context behind the explicit scene. To ease your mind, just know that a relationship between an uncle and his niece is a lot easier to swallow than a relationship between a brother and sister. You have the Lannisters to thank for that. Given that the previous episode left off with Rhaenyra dead, this week's episode will unsurprisingly begin with her funeral. Daemon and Rhaenyra have a quiet conversation on the beaches of Driftmark after Rhaenyra's casket had been submerged. Their conversation is candid and genuine as they share the challenges they've faced in their marriages. There are no tricks, no strange manipulations, and no detours here. Previously, Rhaenyra and Daemon didn't put as much faith in their respective partners as they seem to do in each other. Still, Rhaenyra brings some bitterness to the table. And no, it's not because Daemon's pursuit of her is immoral and abusive. Rhaenyra is angry because she believes that none of the terrible things that have happened to her would have happened if Daemon had chosen her as his wife rather than Rhaenyra. Having just accused Daemon of leaving her, she makes it crystal clear that she is no longer a child, i.e., she is ready to get it on. Coming up, they did the deed on the beaches of Driftmark. They finally go for it after a long drawn-out kiss, in which both partners finally give in to the lust they've had for each other. When the camera pans out, it's an immense moment, but then it cuts back to a much smaller scene. Rhaenyra and Daemon slowly undress each other, while Aemond tries to steal a dragon. As they gaze lovingly into each other's eyes, the audience can't help but appreciate the tasteful way the scene was filmed. Unlike the majority of the show's other depictions, this one is not particularly unpleasant. Some scenes of undressed skin are intercut with intense scenes of desire. There's nothing sexual about any of this, and you wouldn't think anything untoward if you didn't know how the two were related. Not only is this a far cry from Alicent's very concerning sexual scenes with Viserys, but it's also a far cry from the raunchy adultery Rhaenyra and Daemon almost indulged in. Let's look at Daemon's previous performance issues. We know that Daemon had performance issues in the past, but he seems to have gotten over them with Rhaenyra, and the same holds true for her. Without the burden of their former power struggle, the Targaryens may now simply enjoy each other's company. But even after all that tussling in the sand, there is still some power to be acquired here. As the 7th episode ends, Daemon and Rhaenyra have finally found common ground as friends and lovers. They conspire to stage Laenor's death so that he can escape with his paramour on the day of their wedding. Finally, the fans are #Daemira stands. All this points to Rhaenyra eventually bearing children for Daemon, if the source material is to be believed. If the show continues in this vein, only Aegon III and Viserys II, two sons, will be left alive. In any case, we're jumping the gun here. What's intriguing about this program right now is how it portrays its most difficult couple, which also happens to be its most emotional. While we know going into each episode of House of the Dragon that there would be incest, it is still a conscious decision to stoke the #Daemira fires. Perhaps the original series laid enough of a foundation to make Targaryen mating rights acceptable to the general public, in which case we need not be concerned. House of the Dragon could still fail in the future when it comes to #Daemira, even if this scenario doesn't fall into sensationalist cliches. Let's look at how Viserys has made everything 100 times more difficult. Episode 7 sees the reunion of the Targaryen family as a whole. With Viserys at the center of the conflict, it is clear whose side the audience should root against. In the wake of Rhaenyra's death, the whole royal family, including Daemon and the recently reinstated Hand of the King, Otto Hightower, gather in Driftmark for the funeral. Here is where the Dance of the Dragon's major characters finally meet, and where the youngsters' first real alliances are formed. Rhaenyra's sons Jace, and Lucerys, Luke, will meet Daemon's twin daughters, Rhaena and Baela, for the first time at the ceremony. Later that night, the cousins get into a heated conversation over the stolen dragon, Vhagar. The argument escalates when Aemond calls Rhaenyra's son bastards, leading to a physical altercation that ends with Luke slicing Aemond across the left eye. We get to see Alicent's transformation into an openly aggressive individual as she leaps at Rhaenyra with a Valyrian steel dagger, wounding her hand. Even though the queen begs for revenge, Viserys says, "We'll speak no more of it." Viserys spent decades trying to appease people and keep the peace, but he avoided dealing with the the underlying problems and rivalries that would eventually come to a head after his death. As its title suggests, House of the Dragon is mostly concerned with interpersonal conflicts within a single household. When the dynamics of a strong family are unleashed into the political sphere, bloodshed and mayhem are inevitable outcomes. Up next, Viserys acted like a coward. As a monarch, Viserys fails because he is a bad father, and the disintegration of his family undermines his authority. Viserys' fatal flaw is an inability to communicate with those who need it most, an issue that began with his decision to let the maesters perform a C-section on his first wife. Viserys could have and should have honored her right to choose, even though she would have died regardless of whether or not the harsh operation was performed. A better example of this is how Daemon respected Rhaenyra Valerian's decision to end her life rather than undergo a C-section in episode 6. From there, the situation only worsens as Viserys continues to bury family problems because he believes that the best way to carry forward is to let things go, failing to see that his indecision has turned Rhaenyra and Alicent into mortal enemies and their children into bitter rivals. All of the bloodshed and misery in House of the Dragon might have been avoided. Perhaps Rhaenyra wouldn't have felt so betrayed by the king if he had told her about his plans to marry Alicent beforehand. Finally, everything could have been avoided if Viserys had made smarter decisions. Viserys made the decision to marry Alicent Hightower on his own, which drove a wedge between Rhaenyra and himself and destroyed the friendship between her and Alicent. Then, Viserys spent the next decade ignoring Alicent's children and turning a blind eye to Rhaenyra's affair with Harwin Strong. Additionally, Daemon and Rhaenyra could have married if Viserys had permitted them to. Daemon would have had the closeness to the throne he craved, and the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's boys wouldn't have been an issue. Again, Viserys failed as a parent to his children Aegon, Aemond, and Helaena because he didn't provide them with the comfort appropriate for princes and princesses in a subordinate position to the throne. If Viserys assured his second family that Rhaenyra's impending ascent to the throne wouldn't endanger their safety or legal status, then Otto's neurotic brainwashing of Alicent and her children would be rendered null and void. Instead of dealing with the problems at House of the Dragon head-on, Viserys hoped they would go away by ignoring them, but instead, they all came to a head in the Dance of the Dragons. And finally, at his deathbed, he meant to name Rhaenyra and Daemon's unborn child as the prophesized prince, but as his son and their son have the same name, he made things a lot worse. That's a wrap for this video. Do you want to know more about Viserys' shortcomings and the upcoming episodes of HOD? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.